All right, so I'm gonna do focus on chapter 2, which will focus on the early societies in Southwest Asia or Mesopotamia or the Middle East, and the Indo-European migrations, which will form the basis of many other later civilizations. So first off, let's talk about what is civilization. Civilization means, or AKA, complex society. You get a civilization when villages start enlarging themselves into cities. Agricultural surpluses allow for specialization of labor, large-scale markets and trade, cooperative work, like say on irrigation projects, the development of elites, hierarchy, stratification, organized religion, organized military, way of keeping records, and an increasingly patriarchal society. So the first civilizations we see are developed in Mesopotamia, or which means between the rivers. In this case, the Tigris and Euphrates in modern day Iraq. The first dominant people are known as the Sumerians, and basically that's the nice little map depicting where Mesopotamia roughly is. Now the Tigris and Euphrates rivers allow for they do provide nutrient-rich silt, but the problem is that they flood so terribly unpredictably that you need to control it with some large-scale irrigation project. And that is the key in order to harness these rivers. To do that, you need coordinated efforts. And this promotes development of local governments and city-states in order to organize these large-scale projects. First with Sumer doing small-scale irrigation projects around 6000 BCE. Sumerian city-states dominate the region of Mesopotamia from 3200 to 2350 BCE. Some prominent cities include Uruk, Kish. They usually featured ziggurats, which were large pyramid structures that would house their gods, as well as serving as a bank or a market. The kings rule with enormous amounts of power, along with the priests and priest kings. These city-states could control trade and defend themselves from nomadic marauders. Sumer begins declining due to foreign invasions, unsurprisingly. Semitic peoples from northern Mesopotamia start beginning to overshadow Sumer. A guy named Sargon of Akkad comes in, starts conquering the Sumerian city-states one by one. After his Akkadian empire falls, you got a guy named Hammurabi of Babylon, and then creating the Babylonian Empire. His empire is later destroyed by Hittites around 1595 BCE from Anatolia, who are riding horses, who are riding horses and horse-drawn chariots. This proves extremely important in the fact that in those days, and for much of modern human history, horses have played an important role because of their fast speed. With such fast speed and quite frankly shock power, you could achieve devastating results on the battlefield and conquer vast amounts of territory in a short span of time. So there's a legal system. We get some of the one of the earliest major codes of law, or like a codification of the law, with the Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi established extremely high standards of behavior and basically would punish those who violate the code very harshly. It all relied on something called lex talionis, or the law of retaliation, or better known as the eye for an eye. But social status did often impact the punishment. For example, if a slave were to strike a nobleman, the slave would obviously get executed. If the nobleman struck a slave, well, they could get away with it. Women in this legal system were seen as property, but they had some rights, protection from, for example, protection from rape. Now, as central rule begins to weaken, you get foreign invaders starting to conquer the area. By the 8th to 7th centuries BCE, the group known as the Assyrians control Mesopotamia, Syria, Palestine, and most of Egypt. And then a guy named Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon takes advantage of the weakening Assyrian Empire to create his new Chaldean or Chaldean or New Babylonian Empire. He constructs this empire is one of the most well-known aspects of this empire is a fabulously rich capital. And here's just a map of some Mesopotamian empires. We see Hammurabi's empire and the Assyrians expanding from there, and then we can see that the Hittites have control. In addition to controlling Anatolia, are also starting to make incursions into what's modern day Syria. Oops. So some important technological developments in Mesopotamia. Around 4000 BCE, you get bronze, which you mix copper in, which you get by mixing copper with tin into a very, very strong alloy. This has very important military and agricultural applications. Then around 1000 BCE, the Hittites discover iron. This is cheaper and stronger than bronze, which gives the Hittites a major military advantage over the Mesopotamians. Wheels and boats, come around 3500 BCE, and this is massive. In the fact, this is very important. The fact that it allows for large-scale trade networks to exist, because now you have a way to traverse large distances much more efficiently. Social classes. Your status was often based on military prowess or how gloriously you performed in battle. Originally, leaders were elected. Later, it became more hereditary as kings began to take power, accumulate hereditary rights. Kings were often seen as literally the offspring of gods. You also had a religious class. Their main role was to basically appease the gods in order to prevent them from unleashing a devastating flood or a destructive plague. Basically their job was to appease the gods in order to maintain stability. Now, this religious class did have considerable land holdings and would engage other economic activities as well. Then below them you had the free commoners, which include peasant cultivators and some urban professionals. And then below them were slaves, prisoners of war, convicted criminals, debtors, those sort of people. You also get the development of a very patriarchal society. The men own land. The rule, the fodder is, income. The fodder knows best idea is very applicable here. They literally can sell their wives and children. There is a double standard of sexual morality. For example, if a woman committed adultery, she'd be chucked in the river and drowned, whereas if a man had committed adultery, he would be let free, provided the fact that he did not do so with a married woman. Now, there were some possibilities of social mobility for women, such as being court advisors, temple priestesses, and engaging in some economic activity, but you still get you still get a lot of heavy restrictions on women. For example, one of the most prominent examples is the introduction of the veil of at least around 1500 BCE. You also get the development of writing. Sumerian writing systems date from roughly 3500 BCE. At first, they were pictographs, but they were later dropped because they were so clunky, to ideographs. Specifically a cuneiform, which were these 1,000 characters that were wedge shaped. They were written onto clay documents, and they are a major source of information on these societies. They were also very important for their societies because they could communicate with communicate messages and keep records. This starts to decline around 400 BCE with the introduction of the Greek alphabetic script, which is easier to learn, and it finally becomes extinct by 200 CE. And like I mentioned before, some uses for writing, trade. Let's just say I want to trade sheep for wheat. I don't know sheep there, but let's just say I want to exchange cattle for wheat. I can record a transaction, or use the writing to conduct a transaction. Astronomy, record the movement of the stars, maybe write down my hypotheses for future movements. Mathematics, obviously. Mathematics also have an enormous agricultural application, such as timing of the seasons, timing of the harvest, yada yada yada. Calculation of time. They, the Mesopotamians like quite literally invented the 12-month year, 24-hour day, and a 60-minute hour. So one of the one of the most important examples of Mesopotamian literature was the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was compiled after 2000 BCE. It tells the story of, it is basically a heroic a story of a hero or a saga, aka a saga of a very strong and noble warrior named Gilgamesh, who along with his noble friend Enkidu go on all sorts of wild adventures. And some of the lessons that we get from that this story teaches are like, the meaning of life, especially the afterlife. After the story tells the story of after Enkidu dies and Gilgamesh tries to find a way of immortality but fails. Oh, sorry, that's a little blank slide. So we also get, and of course, the Mesopotamians aren't the only people around here. I mean, there are others. For example, the early polytheistic Hebrews. Supposedly, they are descendants of legendary patriarchs and matriarchs from Babylon around 1850 BCE via Ur. Some of their early texts are there are notable comparisons between early biblical texts and the Code of Hammurabi. One of the earliest settlements is in Canaan, Israel, around 1300 BCE. The biblical text tells a story of the Hebrews being enslaved in Egypt and then being redeemed by God. The Hebrews engage in conflicts with indigenous populations under King David and Solomon. Now, an important note is that these early Hebrews were polytheistic. They would often incorporate elements of Mesopotamian polytheistic religion. Now, only later do you get monotheism, the beginnings of Judaism. Moses introduces monotheism, or the belief in a single God, around 1200 BCE. It basically denies the existence of other gods and says, there is only one God. This God is a personal God in the fact that he will reward or punish you depending on your level of conformity with the law, with the or doctrine of the religion. And this doctrine is codified in something called the Torah, or doctrine or teaching, basically the holy text of Judaism. So I think at this point they're called the Israelites. The Hebrews are not called the Israelites. The Israelites do get invaded by foreigners. The Assyrians conquered them around 722 BCE. They conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. They deport many of the inhabitants to other regions, and many exiles just quite literally lost their culture. The culture just vanished. Under the Neo-Babylonian / Chaldean conquest of 586 BCE, the southern kingdom of Judea is conquered. Its holy capital, Jerusalem, is destroyed. Many of the Israelites are forced into exile. However, the Israelites maintain their religious identity, and many return to Judea, where they become known as Jews. Another group are the Phoenicians / Canaanites. They've established city-states along the Mediterranean coast after 3000 BCE. They were not really known for their agriculture, but they were known for their shipbuilding, and they dominated Mediterranean trade from 1200 to 800 BCE. They were basically the founders of the legendary city and rival of Rome, Carthage. They developed their own alphabet. They developed basically alphabet symbols, 22 consonants, which is much easier to learn than cuneiform because cuneiform has 1,000 symbols and this is only 22 consonants. And this allows literacy to spread because it's easier to learn. And that's basically a nice little map showing the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, the Phoenicia. You have Phoenicia here. I think that's the kingdom of Israel. That's the kingdom of Judah. Some Phoenician colonies, Phoenician cities, and their major trade routes. You can see that they made it, all the way. They made it past Iberia. So one of the most important developments around this time is the Indo-European migrations. 19th century linguists noticed that there were, centuries ago, linguists discovered there were remarkable similarities in the languages of Europe, Southwest Asia, and India. This implied that there must have been some, forerunner people before them that created a founding language. Because otherwise, how else would they be similar? This implied that there was a group called the Indo-Europeans that existed. They probably originated around in modern-day Ukraine and Russia around 4500 to 2500 BCE. And their main advantage was the domestication of horses in their native homeland, and combining that with Sumerian weaponry / wheel technology, which allows them to spread very rapidly. Because, like I said before, if you're riding a horse-drawn chariot, you have an enormous military advantage. You can just crush your enemies with rapid lightning strikes. I mean, as my own teacher says, they were quite literally the tanks of their own day. And we can see that these Indo-European migrations starting the homeland of southern Russia / Ukraine, spreading out into Europe, and then into Mesopotamia, and then into India. This development will be very significant. This development will be very significant later on. So, some effects of Indo-European migration. The Hittites, one of the descendants, or known as the Hittites, if you remember from earlier, migrated to central Anatolia around 1900 BCE, and they later dominate Babylonia. They influence trade tremendously. They bring with them, as they move, they bring their horses and chariots with spoke wheels with them, which will actually play a key role, which will later actually give one of the early Chinese dynasties a significant military advantage. Instead of cast iron, they would forge and beat iron, which would prove much stronger. They were migrated to western China, such as the Tarim Basin, Greece, Italy, Germany, Spain, France, Britain. They would also be the ancestors of Persians, Medes, and the Aryans in India. And basically, you also and believe it or not, the Indo-Europeans are also part of a larger group called the Central Asian nomads, or horse people. They're basically a major source of human migration. Various groups underneath them are Indo-Europeans, the Huns, the Turks, and the Mongols, and as the phrase says, the Khans can. Because of the fact that they're using horses, it gives them a tremendous military advantage over those that they encounter. This nice little tree, language tree, describes where many of today's languages come from. I mean, it literally originated from Proto-European. English, for example, it goes Germanic, West Germanic, then Anglo-Frisian, Old English, Middle English, Modern English, and Middle English has influences from French, which is descended from Latin, and Italic, which is also descended from a Proto-Indo-European language. I mean, it's just so much diversity from one main origin.